And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather, storm system here in the front, bringing rain and snow to the Alaska Peninsula, northeastward here into the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, on down the Panhandle here. And then for tomorrow, another system comes up toward Kodiak Island and increases the wind and rain there later in the day. And the remnants of the original front here washed out along the North Gulf Coast for areas of light rain and snow here in this area. And cloudier skies continue over the eastern interior. Some areas of light snow, especially along the Alaska Range here, more isolated and flurry type snow up to the north, nothing any significant there. And then for the day Monday, this storm becomes even deeper here and quite a gradient now over the eastern or the Gulf of Alaska up to the North Gulf Coast. So gale and storm force winds associated with that front, and pretty good shot of moisture too. And again, another complex mixture of precipitation here occurring across southern Alaska, tapering off there, and nothing really north of the Alaska Range, Copper River Basin, mostly over the western areas there. Otherwise, a weaker system with not much wind with it, but it keeps it showery for the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Coastal water forecast, south coast of the Panhandle, south winds tomorrow 15 to 20 knots, and southeast 25 to 35 knot winds on the north coast. Lynn Canal, north at 15, and for Stevens Passage, north winds at 40 knots there with lower gusts, and southeast winds at 15 knots for Stevens Passage, or Clarence Strait, I'm sorry. Right, Clarence Strait right there, southeast of 15. And then for Monday, big increase in the winds here. We've got gale warnings along the south coast for southeasterlies at 35 to 40 knots. Gale warnings and storm force warnings here for the North Gulf Coast. East winds 45 to 60 knots with seas over 20 feet, 20 to 30 feet up there. Southeast 15, Lynn Canal, southeast 20 with higher gusts for Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait. Southeast winds 25 knots and gusty. North Gulf Coast tomorrow, east to southeast winds 25 to 30 knots. Prince William Sound, smoke craft advisories east at 25, sea 6 feet. And gale warning, southern Cook Inlet here in Kamishak Bay, winds northeast 40 to 45 knots with 30 knots southeast winds for the Barren Islands. And then for the day on Monday, we've got northeast winds at 30 knots here, forecast for Cook Inlet, east 30 for the Kamishak Bay area. The Barren Islands down to 25 knots. Storm force winds for the eastern North Gulf Coast out of the southeast at 50 to 55 knots. Storm warnings in Prince William Sound. Southeast winds 50 knots with 13-foot seas. Kodiak Island, east-southeasterlies tomorrow 25 to 35. Alaska Peninsula, north to northeast, 25 to 30 knot winds, and northeast at 30 for Bristol Bay. And for the day on Monday, Kodiak Island, east winds 15 to 20 knots. Bristol Bay, east at 25, and the Alaska Peninsula, not too bad. South to southeast, 15 to 20 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, north to northeast winds, 15 to 25 knots. Adak and Atka, east at 20 knots, and the western Aleutians looking at northeast winds at 30 to 35 knots with seas up around 20 feet. And then for the day on Monday here, for the eastern Aleutians, northwest 15 to 20 knots, Adak and Atka north at 25, and the western Aleutians north to northeast winds at 30 knots. And for the southwest coast, for tomorrow, northeast winds here at 25 knots, gale warnings for St. Matthew Island, northeast at 35, northeast 30 knot winds for the Pribilofs, St. Lawrence Island, and Norton Sound. And then for Monday, no change up here in the northern areas. Northeast winds 30 knots for Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, and brisk wind advisories for the southwest coast. Northeast winds 25 knots, and northerlies at 30 to 40 knots here for the Bering Sea from St. Matthew Island southward to St. George. And up to the Arctic coast on the east side, looking at east winds at 30 knots there, northeast 15 to 20 knots here on the central coast, with brisk wind advisories for the western Arctic coast and also for the Chukchi Sea for north to northeast winds at 25 to 30 knots. Gale warnings for the Chukchi Sea on Monday, north to northeast winds 35 knots, northeast at 20 knots for the western Arctic coast, and for the central and eastern coast, northeast winds at 15 knots.